Alright, hello everyone. For those who don't know me, I am a third year IT student at the University of Central Florida. And so one thing I was hoping to do with this video is I know people who were in the place that I was a year ago where, you're going into taking programming classes and maybe you've never done that type of thing before, or if you have, it's been very minimal. If you have done a lot of programming, this class is probably not something that you really need to worry about too much unless you've never done it in C. If you're experienced in Python, this could still, give you some trouble. And so let's kind of look at the class overview. And I started this class a year ago, so um, the first, set of things, variables and operators, plus sign, integers, characters, these should not be challenging for really anyone. There might be some unusual or unfamiliar syntax that you see, but it really shouldn't be anything that slows you down too much. Now, you're going to start getting into user-defined functions, and for someone who hasn't programmed, the concept itself might be a bit difficult to get down. And once you do, it's really just the syntax that can really get you, because it requires it be exact for it to accept, its inputs and its outputs. It can be kind of annoying. But once you get it down, it's no big deal. And it's something that you really do need to get down before you move on to Computer Science 1 if your degree does include that. Now, I should add that most of these videos I do are kind of based around IT or computer science majors and computer engineering even. And so, with this class, there are a lot of other majors that have to do this, mostly STEM degrees, but I've seen physics majors, I've seen mechanical engineers that have to do this class. And the biggest difference is that, for somebody who's in a mechanical engineering or physics major especially, it's kind of just something you have to get through, and you're probably not going to have to utilize too much after this point. For somebody who is an IT or computer science major, it's very, very important that you do well in this class and you get the concept. And the other thing I recommend is Computer Science 1 is known as the weed out class for IT and computer science majors here, and you really, really need to get this stuff down for that class. I also recommend that you take this class and then take Computer Science 1 as soon as humanly possible. The more time passes, and the longer it's been since you've gotten the basic concepts down and had an opportunity to get them, they're really going to take about 20 minutes of one day to go back over all this stuff, and that's not enough. So I recommend you take this class, practice C during the break, and then go into Computer Science 1, else it's going to be a real hurdle for you. And to be honest, even if you do that, it's going to be a real hurdle. Anyway, so the next point is pointers. Pointers tend to be really challenging for a lot of people, especially if you've never done programming. It is such a hard concept to comprehend, and I can admit that I didn't really understand it until the very end of the class, and then just barely. It even took me some into Computer Science 1 to understand it. And so much that you do is going to be based around pointers in Computer Science 1. And so it can be really difficult, to keep this in your head if you take a break. So pointers, when you go over those, if you don't understand them at first, don't get too frustrated, because they are, a very hard concept to really understand. And once you do understand them, they seem quite simple, but there are some things about the syntax that are a bit misleading and make it difficult. And arrays and structures, arrays should not be difficult, and I hope they're not if you're an IT computer science major. Structures, I say they're not hard, but I know some people that have struggled with structures well into their Computer Science 1 class, and it can be a very difficult concept for some to get down. String and string manipulation, it can get complicated. The idea of it shouldn't be too rough, but you can get large input files, and you have to sort through different things like spaces and periods and whatnot. So that can get a bit difficult. At least in my Intro to C class, we never took it to the level of difficulty, but in my Computer Science 1 class, we most certainly did. So getting that concept down is pretty important. The advanced I/O, that's pretty important too. That's your ability to look at, in these cases, it's a text file. And and you have to look at the text file and be able to take things out of it, perhaps edit things to it, and so that can be a little bit of a pain. If there's some syntax you're going to have to learn, and it can be a little difficult at first. And you're going to really need it in the future, so it's going to be a core part of your future assignments. Even in classes like security and computing and computer architecture, you're going to need to use this most likely. Multiple file programs, for us, that was something that they didn't actually go over that much. It was important to get it down to understand kind of the way it works, but they never actually made us make a multiple file program in Intro to C. Now that was very different in Computer Science 1. They were all multi-file, so get as much of that out of that as you can. And dynamic memory allocation, something you're going to do a little bit of in Intro to C, and you need to understand how it works, because if you don't, Computer Science 1 is going to be a nightmare. I can guarantee you that. Linked lists is something we had to get into a decent amount in Intro to C. It was kept as simple as it could possibly be kept outside of the fact that you're making a linked list. Basic searching and sorting, again, was something that we did have to do to a very small extent. You're going to pick up on that big time in your Computer Science 1 class. And so, to clarify, Computer Science 1 is going to take the C that you learn the basics of in Intro to C, and it's really going to run with it. They're basically going to throw you to the wolves in that class, and I like to say depending on what teacher you get, but the two biggest teachers that teach it here are Sean Zumlansky and Arup Guha. Neither of them make the class easy, and I had Sean Zumlansky. He's kind of known to be the hardest one, maybe a bit arguable, but I think most people would agree that's true. He's also a lot of fun, but he's gonna see if you can sink or swim, and he knows you can't swim. So be prepared to lose a few nights of sleep. In Intro to C, you might lose some nights of sleep. Just, I would say, don't assume that you won't. When you get a program, you might hit a wall, you might get really lost, but it is something you can fight your way through. It's something that, Google is a really good resource. If you get stuck with something, it's good to just research it and figure out what's going on, because it can be really hard if you just bang your head against the wall all night long. And so that's basically the course overview, but let me show you a few of the assignments that you can expect to run into. And so this is the first program here, and this is pretty easy. It's known as the Hello World program. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this before, even if you haven't done programming, where it's literally just a main function, and you can see that right here where I put my name on the top. You have to include stdio, and you're going to get taught that pretty early, and then you just write the main function and do a print statement that says hello world. And what that does is literally just this. Hello world. See? Beautiful. Okay, and so that's going to be your first program. Don't expect it to take you too much time, because it won't. And you might have a week or so before you have to go into the next one. And I should explain a little bit the program that I'm opening this in. It's called Code Blocks, and that is the preferred IDE, as they call it, for that class. And so it does several things. First and foremost, it's kind of a Notepad++ typed text editor, where you get your stuff colored in to help you differentiate things. But the main thing it does is it has a compiler built in, and as you could see, with one button I was able to run my program. Now this can be really helpful when you're starting out, because if you are working on something where you have a syntax error of some type, you can quickly try different options to see which one is successful. And so that's really important to have something like that when you might have to try something 100 times before you actually turn it in for different reasons. It's nice to be able to do that quickly, and they're going to recommend that you get it anyway. One thing that I do have to mention is that if you are using a Macintosh computer, there are some hurdles to installing it. So I would recommend, if you're going into an Intro to C class at UCF, there's a high likelihood you're going to be asked to use this IDE. Try to get it installed before the class starts, because I know several people who are very highly hindered from having to deal with that not working at the get-go. And without it, if you're beginning in programming, you really do need it or something like it. And when they recommend you use that, it is, you should, because you don't want to write a program that runs on your IDE but not on theirs. And there are some examples where that's true. And that's the one they're going to use to compile your programs. So you should definitely get that under control if you have a Mac. If you don't have a Mac, it should be no trouble, especially not in Intro to C where you're writing single file programs. If you're really into it, if you really want to get off to a good start, I would recommend installing it and figuring out how to write projects where you put your C file in a project, because that allows you to actually debug the program, and it can run it in a way where it shows you where it crashes. And that's not going to be super important until the latter half of the class, but it's very helpful if you need, a little bit of stack in the deck is what I call it. So after that, you're going to go to a program that's slightly more complicated. And I feel like this is actually a decent step up from the first one. So what this one does is it's kind of a basic list here where it looks kind of long, but it's not that complicated. And so what you have here is we've set some kind of static variables here. And so what that does is you're choosing a city that you want to go to from Orlando, Florida, since you're a student at UCF. And then you're going to choose an airplane. And we're going to use some calculations that are defined up here. You can see the airplane's defined here, and the city is defined here. And what you're going to do is there's two switch statements where you grab, actually one switch and one is if-else, and the difference between switch and if-else is pretty arbitrary. There are two different ways of doing pretty much the same thing depending on how you like things done. And so what they basically do is they're indexing things for you. You're able to ask the user what they want, and the computer remembers what that means. And so in this case, we have distance here with the city. That's the distances with the cities. And then here you have, I believe, the speed of the plane. Yes. And so we're going to do a mathematical calculation here to figure that out. And it's not as complicated as it looks. I mean, considering it's your second program, it might look a little bit intimidating if you've never done any programming. So let me just go ahead and demonstrate it. Oh, wait a minute. I gotta do this one. There we go. Okay, so you can see what it's doing is it's asking me to push a key for which place I want. I'm going to choose Paris. Why not? And I'm just going to push enter. So now it has Paris and it wants to know what plane. I'm always tempted to push Concorde, but let's go with the A330. That's 3. And then it calculates the time it takes in hours and minutes to get there. So there are some calculations to keep in mind on this, You can see I have flight hours and flight minutes. You are going to have to deal with some math, and if you're not comfortable with dealing with basic math like this, get prepared to, because programming is going to, there are so many situations in programming, and dealing with hours and minutes is just one of them, where you're going to have to, divvy up numbers based on a measurement system. And so that's basically that program. It's really not that complicated. But you can see it looks a little bit long, but it's not as complex as it looks. And so then we go on to something like this. And I'm trying to remember what this is off the top of my head. But it's something that it's probably shorter, I think. A little bit. So, okay, this is a program that takes in numbers. And it just takes in any number that you give it. And so it's going to deduce whether that number is odd or even, right? And it's going to take down how many times it's seen an odd number, and the sum of those odd numbers. It's going to do the same thing for even numbers. And it's going to keep doing that until you give it the number 0. When you give the number 0, it's going to give you those statistics. And so this is a little bit more arithmetic here, but it's kind of a little, a fun, nice little thing to see, and you get to understand loops a little bit better. And I believe, yes, in this thing, they required us to use a function to do something. And truthfully, in this program, a function is completely unnecessary. A separate function, I should say. Um, and so he made us do it anyway, to see that we could write our own function. Now, I took a bit of an easy way out, and I had a function that all it really does is it sends all of the I should say integer variables I've taken down regarding the number of times it's seen the different types of numbers and the sum of those different numbers, and it sends it that function's way and prints something. That means for me that it doesn't have to return anything, which is, when I was in this class, another big challenge, trying to get a function to return something correctly. All it has to do is do a print statement. And so we have seen some kind of funny things with this one. Apparently one student actually, being told he had to put a function in there, his decision to deal with it was to just write a main function that runs a function. And his whole main function was just run this function. So my teacher wasn't super impressed with that. He wanted something a little bit more integrated, and I did something like that. But again, it could be a bit more integrated than it is now. This is kind of I even consider it a bare minimum, which I'm not proud of. But here's basically what it does. And so it asks for my name. You're going to learn scanf statements for that. And they're not a big deal. You'll learn about them pretty easily, I think. And so it wants a number, 5, and it tells me odd, enter a number. And you can see right now, I'm not very good yet at dealing with print statements where I don't know all the character assignments, because when you print something in C, you have to use certain symbols to do certain things. Like \n is a new line. You can use spaces in it for, that represent space, but when you're writing those print statements, sometimes it's a bit dicey and you can't really see the way it's going to be. And I hadn't gotten good at that yet. So I'm going to do 66, that's an even number. I could do 33, I could do 9, I can do 4, I can do a big number, and so I can just keep doing this, and what it's going to end on is when I give it 0. And there it says, my name, Mark, the numbers you entered are broken down as follows. 7 odd numbers with a total value of 561. Entered 7 even numbers with the total value of, oh man, I'm not going to, no commas, I can't really translate it. So, big number. So anyway, that is that program. And it's not as hard as it looks, but it takes a little bit more intuition about programming. And so let's see what we have next. Another one he gave us was this one here. And I believe this starts to get a bit more complex. I can't quite remember. And so yeah, here's what we have here. This is one, and you know what? I might have to run it to remember what it does. I think it has something, okay, yeah. So this takes in temperatures from a random number generator. You're going to learn to deal with that. Let me just run it and see what it does. Yeah, so the time of day is done 1 through 24, but these numbers are generated from a random number generator. It's kind of known as a pseudo-random number generator, because one thing you learn here is that nothing is truly random. So what it does is it takes in those random numbers, which simulation is that's from a, kind of an input device, but we don't have any input devices, so we're just going to make them up random. But you might notice they're all normal temperatures that you would expect to see. And so there's a reason for that. There's a little bit of math involved. You can see that. And even if I do it again, different numbers this time, different numbers here, but they're all kind of in that same range. And there was a bit of programming involved in that to make that happen. And so that's really all it does, though, is it generates all those numbers, figures out the average, and this is a different type of variable here. I believe a float that did this one, either that or it's a long float. The minimum and the maximum, and so a little bit more math involved here, but really, as compared to last time, not too much worse. The biggest thing is you have to learn to use srand, and that can be a bit more of a challenge than it looks, but once you get it down, it's no big deal. And so you can't just use rand, and the issue with that is if I used rand, every time I ran it, it would give us the same random numbers. It's still technically random, but not as cool. So there's that. And so after that, you're starting to get near the end of the class. This is homework 6, I did -5. One thing you'll learn in these classes is to always do things in versions. Don't risk messing what you have up. Once you hit a milestone, save it as a different file and keep going from there. That way you're not afraid to mess things up. And so in this one, we started getting into structures and linked lists. Now for a lot of people who are going into programming, don't know if they're going to be good at it or not, this is like a nightmare because it seems very counterintuitive and very difficult. It's not something that comes naturally to the human mind. And so if you look through it, you'll see what you basically have is a very simple linked list. And again, if you're not experienced in programming, this is not something I can explain on the spot. I can basically tell you it uses a number of different pointers to locate memory addresses. But if I run it, you're just going to see this, where it's basically assigned a number to a node of the corresponding number. Very simple as far as a linked list assignment goes. You can't have a simpler one. Maybe if there were less numbers, but it's creating nodes, it's assigning the number to the node, even though that's not really necessary, but just so there's something in the data point that you can, and here's the reason for that, is the next assignment, and I believe this is the very last one, he's going to do the same thing, but he's going to have you create it invisibly and then have you search for it. So, it's already created the list at this point, and I want to see number 12. Number 12 was found at node number 12. I don't know if I've actually ever tried this, but what if I did 34? Oh, well, I guess there's more nodes in this one then. Oh, okay, now I'm a bit curious. What if I did... Yep, there we go. So there is a point where it's out of bounds. And you can see I put a rather cheeky thing in there, and I started doing this with some of my assignments. But I wouldn't recommend that. And one thing that you might see me doing that is a very bad habit that I've gotten myself out of is, I don't know if I did it in this one, but in some of my assignments you'll saw I use kind of arbitrary variable names like Obama or Bob. It's not something you should do in your programs. You always want to create a variable that's named the same as kind of what its function is, if you can. And you can see actually by now it looks like I've kind of gotten out of that habit already. Now this is one thing that is interesting to look at is malloc. That's dynamic memory allocation. And do a linked list, you have to be able to do that. It can be a little bit difficult, and again, it's something you're going to want to get down. But beyond that, I got an A in this class, and it was not easy, especially for somebody who's never really done any real programming. If you haven't done any real programming, I don't want to dissuade you. I don't want to deter you, but be prepared to learn a lot and try to pick things up on your own, because there will be students in your class that have been programming earlier in their lives, and it can seem kind of intimidating to keep up. But I hadn't done very much programming of any type. Really all I'd ever done is scripting and some HTML, and it's really nothing like this. And so you just kind of have to know is be prepared to work hard, but if you do, it'll work for you in the end, especially if you're an IT or computer science major, because you are going to need these skills come Computer Science 1. And in the future, I'll do a video on Computer Science 1 because that's a much more daunting class. This class is a bit scary if you've never programmed. Computer Science 1 is just plain scary. And so, again, don't want to dissuade you. If you're in these majors and you like what you do, I think you're going to be fine. One of my main things is some people in Intro to C, this class here, they are going to find that programming is not for them. And if you do get to that point where it becomes clear that programming is not for you, you might want to think about changing your major, because you're going to be doing this in many other classes, not just Computer Science 1. I've taken 2 other classes beyond that, in fact even more, that required us to program in C, or at least some language, but I think in the best of them we were limited to either C, C++, or Java. And Java is one I haven't gone over because I actually haven't taken the class, although I do know how to do some programming in Java now. But this is just C. Intro to C and Computer Science 1, you are going to be limited to programming in C. So a lot of, in my computer architecture class had us write a program that was limited to only C. So you're going to have a lot of programming you have to do in C. I would never tell anyone to change their major, but there is a certain point at which if you decide that you really hate programming, you have to think about it. And this would be one of the bigger times you could figure that out. I would implore you not to be too quick to that and try to maintain a good attitude regardless. You're going to have some frustrating times. You're going to have, some programs that keep you up. And you're going to think to yourself, oh God, I'm not good at this. If you haven't done this before, it's going to happen. But I implore you to push on, because I had to do that, and I really, really love programming, especially in C right now, because I've learned that it takes some hard work, takes some troubleshooting, but when you get it right, it feels really good. So a little bit of perseverance is a good thing to have in this class. And again, if you're already good at programming, this kind of might look like a joke to you, but for somebody who hasn't programmed in their life, it's going to be a challenge. And so I just want to prepare you for it, and I think that's really all I have to say. So if you have any comments, any questions about the class, always feel free to message me or comment in some way. I've gotten to the point where I got through CS1, and I also got an A in CS1, which I consider a huge accomplishment, but I understand there are some basic things that you just need clarification for them. And if you want to message me something about that, hopefully I can respond to you. Alrighty, guys, have a good night.